Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Mobility Mindset. Today, we're joined by Brenda. She's a dedicated advocate and a proud mom of two boys. She's from school boards and national committees. She's using her voice to push for better systems for neurodiverse kids and their families. So let's get into it. And Brenda, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yeah, for sure I can. Happy to do that. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So as you said, my name is Brenda and proud mom of two boys. My older son, Chase, is going to be 20 in November. My younger son, Maclain, is going to be 18 in August. And it is my younger son, Maclain, that brings me into this world. So Maclain has cerebral palsy. He was diagnosed. He kind of has a little bit of a crazy story. So Maclain is a surviving twin. He was an identical twin. His brother passed away at 29 weeks in utero. So Maclain was delivered essentially to save his life. Unfortunately, when he was in the NICU, after he was born, he developed a very common thing known as jaundice. A lot of people have heard of jaundice. It's very, very common. When jaundice is not treated, it becomes neurotoxic and develops a condition known as Kernicterus. And sadly, Maclain was not treated for his jaundice. That's probably a whole other podcast. And he developed what's known as Kernicterus, which left him with damage to his basal ganglia, resulting in cerebral palsy. And he's also profoundly deaf and wears cochlear implants. So it's been a pretty wild 18 years. When I'm not wearing my parenting hat, I'm a director of marketing for a law firm called Gluckstein Lawyers. And I'm also a school board trustee with the Halton Catholic District School Board. So I help to sort of lend my voice there a little bit where I can and sort of, do what I can to make things a little bit better for students with disabilities.
Awesome. Okay, so can I ask you how parenting in this way has changed your view of the healthcare system?
Oh my goodness, we're going right,
get into it. We're looking at the caliber of the questions that I got lined up here, and we got to go hard and go heavy because there's.
Okay. Totally fine. Totally happy to do it. So it's interesting because I think it's really a challenge. When I had Maclain, I just described, sort of our experience initially with Maclain. So, given that Maclain's brain damage was caused by medical negligence. And so when you start your healthcare journey, listen, I'm so very grateful to the individuals, the doctors, the nurses who, helped him when he was in the NICU with everything else he had going on. But essentially when you realize that there has been an error in, protocol, in guidelines, and that has left you in this situation, it immediately caused distrust almost from the onset. And so, that's been something that's been sort of sitting on my shoulder. So then you kind of move past that, and now you're having to navigate, as you all well know, all of the different components that come with it. And, dealing with multiple hospitals and multiple clinics with multiple doctors. Nobody talks to each other. Nobody collaborates on things. Everything is very siloed. It's been complicated. I say to people, two of the most challenging navigations that we have had have been the healthcare system and the education system. I don't think that parents are taken seriously as being partners in this journey when it comes to healthcare. I often say to physicians and clinicians, you know a lot about a lot of things. I know a lot about kind of one thing when it comes to healthcare, and that's my son. So it's definitely been challenging. It's, again, having voices heard, being listened to, trying to get the appropriate resources, trying to get the appropriate appointments, trying to get things, addressed. Nothing has come easy. We have fought for everything that he has had from a healthcare perspective. We've advocated for his cochlear implants. We've had to prove them wrong for that. We've advocated for any of his GI interventions. We have advocated for his hip surgeries. We've run the gamut.
Do you remember what the catalyst, if there was a catalyst, what the catalyst was that pushed you from parent into advocate? What was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say, Mark, I would honestly say it was almost immediate. I would say right in the NICU, I had this sense that I was going to need to play a bigger role than just being Maclain's mom at that point. My older son, had him, went home 2 days later, everything was great. Almost immediately, I remember wanting to be a part of the rounds. I wanted to ask questions. I remember there's anyone that's a NICU fan, they have this big black book, and the big black book would sit at bedside, and they don't let you see the big black book. And I wanted to have access to that book. I wanted to know what were the comments, what was being said, what was being ordered, what were we facing, so I would say it was almost immediately. I advocated for a primary care nurse. I advocated for, so many things there. And so that was kind of it was an immediate catalyst for me as far as I thought. Now, did I think it was going to continue for the next number of years? No, but I knew at that moment that this was going to take more than just sort of showing up and letting whatever was going to happen. I knew I was going to have to be a voice of some kind. And then that spiraled into everything else that, I've been through the last number of years. I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it absolutely does. Like I remember that exact same scenario happening within my home. Well, not I guess my home because we was in the NICU, but yeah, no, you getting more I don't know. You feel like you have to take some ownership over something. You need to know what's happening, and like that big black book, like yeah, I know. I remember it very well. My wife was kind of played that exact same role in our household during that time because there needs to be somebody doing it.
yeah, I probably would say there's one other one, probably too, Mark, that I'll just jump in quickly. Another really big one for me was Maclain's cochlear implants. I remember when Maclain was when he got diagnosed with his hearing loss, it was almost more. I'm going to use the word devastating because it was. I was almost more devastated when he received that diagnosis versus his cerebral palsy diagnosis, because everything I'd read, I thought, okay, there might be a chance something here. He's preemie. We were never expecting to have a diagnosis for hearing loss. And so when they came and said, your son is profoundly deaf, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because all I could think about is, how is he going to sign? How is he going to do this? How is he going to do that with this, the physical piece? Anyways, we went down the path really quickly about pursuing a cochlear implant, and they didn't want to give him one because he didn't fit the mold of a typical kid who receives a cochlear implant. He had all of these other comorbidities. He had a disability. And I remember them saying the whole point of a cochlear implant is to eventually produce speech, right? Is eventually that there's enough coming in that there's stuff coming out. And we don't know if Maclain's ever going to be verbal. And I thought, so he can't have access to hearing sound. He can't have access to that. He can't have access to that because he may not be able to talk. And that I remember searching up experts, going down to Albany to see people talk. I remember rallying the troops, getting other families to write support letters for us. And I do remember that was probably my biggest advocacy role initially when it came to the healthcare system, was trying to identify that not every kid is the same. Their needs are going to be very different. And why would we assume that he would be less than worthy of receiving this technological, advancement that could give him access to the world around him in a meaningful way? And that was a big catalyst for me, sort of outside of that inherent NICU experience that we have.
Makes complete sense. I had a similar conversation to that at one point when we had when Mitchell received the same diagnosis of profound hearing loss, and honestly the exact same conversation. I didn't roll with it in the same direction that you did. We ended up with hearing aids as opposed, but because cochlear implants weren't even an option.
Right. Yeah. And I think we did try hearing aids. Just for Maclain, he had what's known as auditory dysynchrony or auditory neuropathy. And so for him, hearing aids would just amplify the kind of radio static. So for him, the best course was going to be this cochlear implant. And I was so naive. I thought, no, he'll go. They'll assess him. They'll say, yeah, no, he met the criteria. Like his MRI was perfect. He met all of the criteria. The fact that a judgment was being made on his viability of receiving this implant based solely on the ability for him to be verbal, to me was completely that was just, and then I realized that was actually the norm. That was not the exception to how decisions are made in the healthcare world. But it was shocking for me at the time. I thought, this is just why am I fighting for this? So it was pretty. And it's probably the single most important thing we've ever advocated for him. And we've advocated for a lot, but I would say the ability for him to have access to sound, and he is verbal, very verbal, I think was probably one of our biggest, that was probably one of our biggest accomplishments when it came to the things that have benefited Maclain in his life, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if it's okay, I'd like to switch the gears a bit, kinda. So instead of just advocating for your son, you took it in a different kind of way and have decided to go at the systems that are creating this problem in the first place. And can I get you to talk a little bit about it?
Sure. I mean, I think I've done it in a few different ways. Some of them, I think I've always been someone that's sort of spoken up. When you're in a room and they're like, does anybody have anything to say? And no one puts their hand up. And I'm like, fine. Yes, fine. I will put my hand up. I've always kind of been that person. And so it was interesting that I found my way into this unintentional advocacy role. But yeah, I think I sort of realized along the way that if I was using my voice for Maclain, there was definitely going to be other families and other kids that had been impacted by what was going on. And so, what was a way for me to be sort of intentional in my advocacy? And I also realized that there was going to be things that I was fighting for him that would not see resolution in the time frame with which he would benefit from, but it didn't mean that they weren't important. So it's kind of gone a few different ways. I mean, obviously, from a legal perspective, we did take the hospital to task on what happened to Maclain. And by doing that, we actually had all of the guidelines overhauled and updated with the hope that this would never happen to another child in his situation. I realized really quickly that the way to have effective advocacy and to actually get things changed was to start looking at changing policies and procedures and protocols, because that's how you know then that it's actually going to be concrete. So I was like, well, how do I do that? So then, it was joining research committees. It was joining family advisory committees. It was being there at the time that protocols and policies were being established and discussed. And so, I did that. I've done that through a few different ways in the CP world or in the research community. I was on the Burlington Accessibility Advisory Committee for a number of years, trying to work at a municipal level. And then I kind of was like, okay. And then I looked at what was going on as we were navigating our school journey. And so then I recognized that we were seeing the same challenges in navigating the school system. So I was like, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And also I would hear from people that would say they were fighting the same battle 15 years ago. And I thought, well, why is that still happening? That's ridiculous. And so, I kind of weaved my way in there and started as on our SEAC board, which is the Special Education Advisory Committee, and then realized again that I needed to be in a position where I actually could move the needle forward a little bit, and decided to run for school board trustee. And so I'm in my second term as a school board trustee, but that gives me the ability to review policies and procedures as they're being developed, to sit on committees that are discussing these. It's a different level of accountability. And I've really tried to ensure that the things we're doing as a school board are creating those opportunities for accessibility and inclusion. So I feel like just kind of every time I've gotten into something and something's been a little bit broken, I'm like, well, why aren't we working together to try to fix this? And that's where it's just taken me in all of these different avenues. And I do have people ask that, Mark. They say, well, okay, Maclain is no longer, why are you still fighting things in an elementary school? Or why are you still fighting? I will still go and get involved with providing diagnoses to families, right? So what's the work we're doing when we're actually giving a diagnosis? What's the language we're using? How are we delivering this information? So I'm going back to my roots in the NICU and diagnosis delivery, even though we're not there anymore, because I want to bring my experience to that in the hopes that, again, it's better for the next person that comes down the pipe. So I feel like once you start this, it's hard to not continue to do this. That's sort of just what's snowballed for me, I guess.
So is it safe to assume that you come at it in kind of like a family perspective, and you try to bring that into systems that maybe don't kind of look at it that way?
Yeah, I do. That's a really great way of putting it. I'm a big fan of stakeholder inputs, making sure that we're connecting with the stakeholders. The whole nothing about us without us. The whole, who are these systems and policies and protocols and procedures for? Are we engaging with the impacted individuals or impacted communities to have a say in these pieces? And so it's been trying to find a seat at the table from a family perspective, a lived experience perspective. Sometimes it's being Maclain's voice. Sometimes, I want him to speak for himself, but sometimes I'm that conduit. Sometimes it's me speaking with him about things he'd like to see in the system and me conveying that message. Yeah, more often than not, it's definitely coming from that family perspective, that parenting experience, that stakeholder lens. And that's kind of, the perspective I try to bring.
Do you ever get resistance when you do that? Oh, sorry to cut you off, Sarah. My apologies.
No, totally.
No,
It's a good question.
I'm just trying to figure out how she has my head's going, you've got your hand, which I commend you for jumping in, because you're right. You have to just jump in. Unfortunately, you got to be right in the mix of it, because we can toot our horn all day long, but if you're not in the mix of it to trying to make change, it's just going to be a one-off, and it's not going to be for the totality for every family. How do you balance everything between your family, work, and getting into everything that you're doing?
Super tough. I mean, and listen, I have people that are like, oh, how are you so together? I'm not together. I'm not together. I'm not, I burn myself down. I have days where I don't want to get out of bed. I still have days where I cry. I still have days where I'm frustrated. So I don't, and I'm finding as Maclain is getting older, I've also had to pick and choose what that literal pick and choose your battles. I really have had to sort of shift. I can't do it all. I'm happy to see other parents, sort of coming through that are saying XYZ is important to me and I'm going to take that and run with it. So I don't, Sarah, I don't do it all. I think what happens is I get myself in a situation where I'm like, there's an opportunity here. Let me see what I can do in this realm. And then I do try to bring other people into it. Sometimes I let battles go. Sometimes I don't let them go. But there's a ton of resistance. I'll have people that will reach out to me. So I may have a clinician, I may have a researcher, I don't know. Someone will reach out to me and say, Brenda, do you want to be on this committee? We're looking for input or voice on XYZ. And I'll say, are you sure that you want that to be me? Because I can be collaborative, but I'm also the person that's going to call it out, that's going to hold them accountable. I don't go about advocacy probably in the calmest, quietest way. So, because I do get a lot of resistance, and it happens all day, every day. Like it's as simple as trying to advocate for the school for more accessibility spots or whatever it is. It's nonstop all day, every day. And I often have found that unless you're dealing with someone who has a lot of humility, who actually is dedicated to wanting to make a change in that, they're going to fight you on it, because it takes a lot for someone to say, we haven't been doing this the right way, or we're not doing this the right way, or you're right, we didn't think of it like that. It takes a lot for an institution or an individual to say that. The more common response is, it's fine, or we've done whatever that is, right? So it is difficult. And that, Sarah, I think that for me, that's what burns me out. It's not the level of involvement. I don't think it's even the pace at which I go. It's the barriers. It's the constant pushback. That's what leads to the frustration and the upset most of the time. And then that's when you're like, is this worth it? For my mental health, for my capacity, all that stuff, right? Because the mental health piece is a big piece.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But like you said, isn't it quite shocking? You bring up a big, big point, which is, I think, everywhere. I think
everywhere,
international, US, Canada, everywhere, is that how is this a problem everywhere? And like you said, the resistance that Mark brought and asked up, it's everywhere. There's been special needs children since forever. Like, why are there still barriers? It blows my mind.
Yeah.
It blows my mind. I don't get it.
Especially, I talk a lot about even, physical barriers. I talk a lot about accessibility. That is a big one for me. And I'd say, it's not about the individual with a mobility device. It's about everybody. Like I advocated really hard, which, it's so funny because I sat on this Burlington Accessibility Advisory Committee for, 8 years. And so you'd think, I'm kind of connected with a couple of people through doing that work. And well, apparently I wasn't, because we needed to have one of our local hockey arenas did not have an accessible ramp that you could view the ice. And my older son played hockey for a long time, and Maclain was right in there. We actually couldn't go to this one arena because there was nowhere for him to actually physically watch the game. And I said, you've done all this work to make sure that there is accessible doors, accessible parking, but when the person gets into the venue, they actually can't see. And I remember the response from the city saying, well, Brenda, your husband's a coach. Why don't you reach out to the Hockey Association and see if they can move your son's games to another rink? And I said, how about we leave it there and then you go get an accessible platform and I said, it's not just about my son in a wheelchair. I said, we have a grandparent on the team who had a hip replacement and she's using a walker. We had one of our players who had broken his leg playing hockey. He was in a wheelchair. I said, we have moms that come with kids in strollers. It's not just about Maclain in his wheelchair. It's about making that environment, that built environment, accessible for everybody. So when you build something like that and you make it accessible, everybody benefits from that. The resistance, and I'm talking about an $8,000 addition, an $8,000 temporary ramp until they could get something. And you would not believe what we had. That was one of the biggest battles. It went on for months and months, and I had to go to all levels to try to get that. And I thought, why? Why is this? Why? And then I thought, for how many years has this environment not been accessible? No one walked by and ever commented on that. 100% someone did. 100% someone came before me, and someone just, right? It's always easier to ignore it than you don't have to do anything about it, right? So yeah, it's wild.
Absolutely. Can I focus in a little bit on the school system?
Yeah.
Awesome. So you are on the SEAC committee. Can you tell people what that does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got involved with SEAC, which is the Special Education Advisory Committee. I got involved with SEAC, oh boy, probably 12 years ago, 10 years ago now. And so that is a mandated board. The ministry mandates, actually in legislation, that every single school board have a Special Education Advisory Committee. And that committee is comprised of a number of different individuals. It's comprised of local community representatives. And then each board is a little bit different, but it will have representatives from a number of community organizations. So typically Easter Seals has worked really hard to make sure that they have representatives on SEAC. There's usually someone from a Down syndrome society, autism, deaf and hard of hearing. So you have community organizations that put forward a representative that sits on this advisory committee. Then you also have the special education superintendent that is part of this. The director is often there, and a number of spec ed staff are often there. And then the role of SEAC, as its name would imply, is advisory. But it does a lot more than that. Policies come by SEAC for review. So if there's a policy coming to the board table that might be about mental health or field trips or I don't know, it will come to SEAC first. Well, then you get to have a lens from SEAC. So you may have somebody from deaf and hard of hearing that weighs in, or somebody from Easter Seals that weighs in. And then that becomes part of the consideration on that review when it goes to the board for final approval. So when we talk about policies and procedures being revised and amended and edited to reflect stakeholder feedback, SEAC is a great mechanism to do that. We also make sure that people from SEAC are on different board committees. So now you have someone from SEAC that's on the Mental Health and Wellbeing Committee. They're on the Equity and Inclusion Committee. So now you have a voice of SEAC or special education on all of those committees as well. So then they can help to craft some of those things. So I definitely encourage someone. I know Easter Seals is always looking for representatives for SEAC, but I definitely recommend for parents, if you want to learn more about special education in your board, go to a SEAC meeting. Try to join SEAC. Find out who your SEAC rep is for your, if you have a child that has a specific diagnosis, try to see if they have SEAC representation. It's a great way to learn the special education system just a little bit better from sort of an insider advisory perspective. It's great. I've loved everything about it.
Awesome. So again, with the schools, so the role of SEAC is to help make neurodiverse students feel more included overall. What type of things have you had like your hands in that have actually created some change?
Yeah, so I would say from a SEAC perspective, I think from an education perspective, I probably have had my hands in a few different things from a few different ways. So for SEAC, it's definitely the ability to bring these individual organization representatives together to take a look at these policies and procedures, to take a look. We ask a lot of questions about EA allocation. We ask about budgets. We ask about budget priorities. We make suggestions on budget priorities. So we help to advise and shape some of those decision making that helps there. So definitely I've seen some change that comes out of SEAC because of these conversations. So all of a sudden, as an example, Mark, you have a policy that comes through that's about field trips, just about field trips in general, right? How do field trips work? Well, now you get a hold of it and you're like, hold on a second. There needs to be verbiage in there that says that no field trip can go forward unless it is fully accessible or fully inclusive. So then we change it from accessible to inclusive. It's easy to say that a field trip is accessible because maybe it has an accessible washroom and it has an accessible path, but is it fully inclusive? Now you have the ability to build something into the policy, and then you can have the accompanying procedure. So now what happens is you have a policy that's rooted in inclusivity and accessibility, and then you build a procedure out. So now when principals are booking trips, the procedure is to ensure that wherever they're booking or looking at is fully accessible or inclusive. So those are some of the things that we can do. And then at a board level, I do the same thing. So, I put motions forward to take a look at universal washrooms, to take a look at recognizing International Day of Persons with Disabilities, Red Shirt Day, putting motions forward to make sure that those are ingrained so that every year we celebrate Red Shirt Day or, things like that. So I think it's been multi-pronged, Mark, as far as, the ability to evoke change. And then I also do it through our personal journey where I talk a lot about, Maclain had been pigeonholed very early on about what they felt that his capabilities were from an academic perspective. And now I have a son who's graduating with Ontario Scholar, in grade 12 in a couple of months. And that was never, we had been told early on, why are you asking questions about college? Why are you asking questions about, things like that? So a lot of the work that I've done, I think, to try to make change has been me saying, you insisted on this, this, and this, or you assumed this, this, and this, but yet here we are. And it's been a lot of personal fighting as well. So I think it's been a few different things, but I definitely have seen that change. I've seen the impact of that change that's happened through SEAC. And then, I hope that other families will benefit from that at some point, because we were able to make a change, in some of those policies and procedures and awareness days and onwards and upwards.
Okay. So through this whole journey you've had as an advocate, looking back on it from a perspective now, if you could say something to yourself, say 15, 18 years ago, what would you say to yourself?
It's a great question. Well, I don't know. Because I don't think I would change. I don't think I would change anything that I would done. I wouldn't tell myself something was less important than something else. I wouldn't tell myself not. I mean, when it comes to parenting, I have different parenting advice that I would definitely give myself. But from an advocacy perspective, I would say you just do exactly everything you did was for the right reasons. You did it. You made change. Don't change a single thing about the work that you've done from it. Maclain has benefited from it. Our family has benefited from it. Others have benefited from it. The system has been changed for the better in a number of different ways. And I really wouldn't. I wouldn't change a single thing about that from an advocacy perspective, for sure. I probably wouldn't have listened to myself anyways. Like if I went back and said, Brenda, like just let well enough alone, I'd be like, I'm not leaving well enough alone. I don't know that I would have given myself any different advice back then. It's my personality.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. Honestly, I wouldn't change any. Like, there's highs, there's lows, but that builds you into a more resilient person and gets you ready for the next fight anyway. So, like, I agree. So, if there was one thing, though, that you wanted the people that have been listening to this to take away from the conversation, what would you want it to be?
So, I think, I was saying before about sort of the parenting piece, I definitely, if I could go back on the parenting piece, I'd try to be a little more gentler on myself. I'd try to be a little bit kinder to myself. I would try to, I would want to prioritize. Not everything was important. Not everything. I didn't need to worry about fixing Maclain. I needed to, I think those are the type of things that I've really learned, is that things I thought were important are not as important as they turned out to be. And the priorities are very different than what I thought they were going to be. I think a lot, when you're in the thick of it, as you both would know, there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of, I could do more. I should have done more. I can be more, if I'd only boop, 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 boop. And that's not helpful for anybody. I look at how far I've come with Maclain, and for this boy who is like, he's never going to hear, he hears. He was never going to talk. I can't get him to stop talking. He was never going to go, honestly. Like I was in something yesterday and they said, well, maybe he would want to talk less. And I go, that would be great. He wasn't supposed to be verbal. He was supposed to be tube fed. His favorite food is steak. He'll never power a mobility device independently. He can power a wheelchair with his feet. He'll never he'll never be in a regular classroom with his peers. He'll never he'll never have the same high school experience. Like he just went to prom 2 weeks ago. So, I say all of that not to brag, but I say that because none of that in my mind was possible when he was diagnosed, even when he was 2, when he was 3, when he was 4. And I remember when I got the email that described his diagnosis. And I remember saying to my husband, like, he's never going to play hockey. And my husband was like, well, maybe he'll be the smart one. And he kind of is the smart one. But that's all I could think about was all of the negatives that came with that, all of the things that we were going to miss out on and not have. And I worried so much about that. And I do still worry about that. But man, like I think about how much more I could have been enjoying certain elements of our parenting journey and our family journey had I not been so consumed with what he wasn't doing or what we thought would never happen versus the things that he was doing, and just celebrate those small things and be grateful for those. And then be able to look back and say, man, look how far we've come. I just think we have to be more gentle. No one prepares us for this parenting journey. It is not like parenting a typically a typical child. It is not. There is nothing that is the same with it. And man, we should be so proud of ourselves. We've done an extraordinary job and our kids are better for it, right? So we got to be a little gentler on ourselves. We have to just give ourselves a little bit more grace. And I don't think we do that. And that's what I hope people listening to this, just do what you can when you can with what you have. You don't have to win every fight. You don't have to win every battle. You don't have to hit every milestone. It's just do your very best that you can. And, your kid will be better for it.
What got you over the hump? Another thing is parents always struggle with that. And where did you find that when you finally grasp, now you finally transition and get to that point where that guilt and he's not going to play soccer, he's not going to play ball. When did you find the transition in your life to be able to do that?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Sarah. I still think, and I have friends that have done it much better than me, and I still get on calls with them, and they're like, be grateful, and they journal. And I'm like, I don't do any of that.
I can't.
I don't journal. So, I'm not as good at it as they have been. It's taken me a long time to get to that. I still have my moments. I definitely, as Maclain, the transition into adulthood is horrible. I don't mean to scare anybody, but it is not fun. I worry about what comes next, what's going to happen when I'm not here, what's going to happen with call, all of those things. And then I come back and I'm like, heck, we should have spent more time on communication devices so that it still creeps up once in a while. But I think just as I've gotten older, Sarah, I really I sat there and don't tell Chase this because don't tell Chase this, but I sat there with my younger son and, Maclain went to prom with his friends, some of his lifehood besties he's known since grade 1. And Graham and so Chase went with 4 guys, no dates. They didn't let us take pictures. They drove themselves to prom. It was very different. We went to a pre-prom party with all the parents and had champagne and Maclain lined up with all the girls in their dresses and the rainbow thing. And they took the pictures and they had a bus. And I turned to Graham and I said, who would have thought that this amazing prom experience that we get to experience would have been with Maclain, right? And not with Chase. But think about sitting in that moment. There he is. He's going to prom with his friends. And I've really learned to look at those things that he's accomplished that I've accomplished and take solace in those, Sarah, and be like, I know bad days are going to come again. I know that there's going to be stuff going on. 100% there's going to be. But if I can sit for a moment and look at that picture of him with his friends at prom, and he's going to go to another grad dinner dance, if you can sit in those moments, then I feel like for me, it's allowed me to be a little bit more at peace in focusing on the things we've been able to accomplish rather than what we haven't been able to accomplish. And we've also just adjusted our life. I remember at one point saying God, I don't know if Maclain is going to be able to ski. And someone was like, do you ski? I said, well, no. I don't ski, but he won't be able to ski if he wanted to. And it was like, well, you know what? I can't write with my left hand. So everybody simmer down, right? And I think just being able to accept the stuff for what it is. And I have to, for my mental health, I've had to really just, so I think those they've been little turning points, Sarah, along the way, right? That have come. Yeah. They're tough though. There's still tough days, right? For sure.
But yeah, they always, like you said, you have to, I call them triggers, because you have post-trauma from other things, but you have to learn how to quail them because they're gonna come. It's the reality of life in general. And just how do you handle it,
Yeah.
Because they'll come up. I'm sure you do, Mark. We all have, they come up at the most inopportune times. Like right now when you're talking, I'm getting a little teary-eyed, but
course.
it's just triggers. Yeah. You just little things that will get you and you're like, okay, not today. You just simmer down, put them back where they need to be.
I think a lot of it, Sarah, I think a lot depends on your personality. I do. I think there's people in my life who are just peaceful, calm people, and it doesn't get to them the same way it gets to me. I'm a high, tense type of personality. It impacts me either way. So I think a little bit of his personality, I think it's where you are in the journey. I'm not in the thick of PT sessions. We're not going to 100 appointments a week anymore. I'm not in that space. When I was in that space, I remember I go to one appointment, he wasn't doing, all I heard for years was, oh, he's not lifting his head yet. Oh, he's not in the midline yet. Oh, he's not responding to sound yet. And I thought, oh my God, that's all we had. All I heard about for years was all the things he was not doing, what we needed to be doing more of. Why weren't we doing this? Why? That's all I heard. We've moved out of that a little bit. right? We moved out of that a little bit. And that's been better for my psyche because I don't have all those people to report to anymore about all the things going on, right?
Honestly, I have to echo exactly what you just said, because when you're in the thick of it and you have a bajillion appointments and you have a bunch of people giving you directives and they're just pointing out areas that you could improve on and this will benefit your kid in all these different ways. Not that you have the bandwidth to do any of these things because you're already maxed out at full potential, but the onus, like the idea behind it is positive, but what it ends up creating is somebody who has a lot on their plate already, feeling like they can't keep up with the expectations and that their child is the one that is suffering as a result of it, which creates a parent who isn't necessarily the best parent at that time because they're mentally cooked. Like that itself is a conversation we should probably bring up and have at some point, because that itself is a monster in the room.
It really is. It really is. Because then, like you said, like there's all these, and again, it's all well intentioned, but there's just, I remember coming home and I had a list from PT, a list from OT, a list from SLP, a list from auditory. I'd list nonstop lists. I'm like, who's going to do this in a day? But then if I don't do it, then you go through a period like, is he not sitting because I didn't spend it? Is he not raising his head because I didn't put enough tummy time? Like, is he not pronouncing his S's because we didn't? So then you sit with all of that. And the last thing we need is more parental guilt. And then I want to say, FYI, we still have a family unit and another child. We'd like to be able to go out and do things with him once in a while too. Oh, and by the way, I don't have all the money that it takes to be able to do all of this with. And guess what? In the 8 sessions I get with you, we're not going to make this happen. So how about, I've always been a fan of like, yeah, like how about you all get together and then try to like pair up, maybe if all the teams come together, you can make that list a little bit easier for us to accomplish. But yeah, it's tough, man. Like, it's tough. It really, and I can't even name the number of people I've fired. Like, I was like, I don't think this is working out. Like, we went through a whole thing. I'm like, I don't think this relationship is working out. I'm going to need somebody else. Like,
Yep.
We have fired PTs. We have fired developmental pediatricians. I was like, this is not a healthy relationship. And no, like, we're not doing this. Right. So I remember, oh my gosh, and you're going to have to cut me off because I'll talk all day. I remember asking repeatedly about Maclain. He's hypotonic. He's very low tone. He's hypotonic and he has dystonia. Not a good match. I remember for years saying, can we just have like some x-rays to preventatively look at his hips? Because I'm worried about his hips. Oh, you shouldn't be worrying about his hips. You shouldn't be worrying about his hips. He doesn't fit the mold for hip. Okay. So then I had to get a referral to go to the Shriners Hospital in Montreal because nobody here locally would give us this preventative appointment to take a look. So we went there for years. I remember showing up there one year and the doctor's like, come look at the x-ray. His left hip was completely out of the socket. It was completely 100% out of the socket. And I remember them saying like, were you not doing exercises to help? Were you not? And I was like, for years I asked, and for years you said, don't worry about it. It's not an impact. Anyways, that led into double hip surgery. But imagine me now sitting there at Shriners in tears. He's got a hip popped out. We don't know how long it's been popped out for. I don't know how much pain he's in. And someone saying, like, were you doing any kind of therapeutic horseback riding? Were you doing anything to like help his hip stuff? And I thought, how is that helpful in this particular moment? Like, this isn't helpful at all for me in this. And yet I was the one that was advocating to try to get the proactive measures to make sure that this didn't happen. Like, talk about mental health, right? And now I got to go spend 6 months in the hospital while he recovers. So I swear to God, we could all write books because, our experiences are so
Fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
You
crazy.
think?
It's crazy. It is, honestly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So honestly, it's been an awesome chat, but I think we should cap it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we should talk again because there's zero way we got to like the majority of the things that we still need to talk about.
Totally. And we got time.
If you're open to it, we really should, because there's a lot of we covered a lot of really, the good points. I think sometimes we have to really kind of dive into some of the more nitty-gritty that the parents, the really hard. We try to talk about the treacherous stuff, the hard stuff, the nitty-gritty stuff, and just downright, we need to chat like parent to parent chat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
those are important chats too, because unfortunately, Mark and I, we've talked about this multiple times, and a lot of parents that we chat with sometimes don't get a chat with anybody but
Yeah.
us, or, That's all they talk. Their friends can't connect with
No.
them. They connect with people along the nurses that, they don't get to connect with anybody. So it's unfortunate. And yeah, it's a thing.
The
So
peer piece is so important. I mean, that's why I started PAL. So if anybody is listening and you're a parent of a child with neurodiverse, challenges, it's called the Parent Advocacy Link. You can find it through Facebook. We started it a bajillion years ago. There's about 4,000 families in there, and they're right along the different spectrum. Because I often say the first 2 years of our life, I felt literally like I was in a void. I was in a black hole. I was not in a good place mentally. I didn't know anybody who had another child like Maclain. I remember reading books, but I was like, oh, well, that kid can walk and talk, so I'm not interested in reading that book. I had no one to identify with. So we started PAL, and there's parents that are at different points in their journey, different diagnoses, different geographical locations, different everything. And I'm telling you, like, Mark, you'll know, like, there's posts that go up about where can I find an AFO sock?
Oh man,
700 responses to where to find an AFO sock.
so the PAL link has been like effectively my family's resource to find everything.
Right. Right. And it's the place you go when, and you see it build up where someone's like, I'm coming to McMaster tomorrow. Does anybody need a coffee? Or is anybody going to be here? Like, it's absolutely phenomenal. The level of peer support. You can see there's people who are sponging it up. It was my first place to go to for years on advice or just to vent about things. Because to your point, we need to talk to people who get it. We need to have zero judgment. We need to have people that can offer advice or just listen, because it's very lonely. Being a parent of a child with different needs is very lonely. And it's as amazing and wonderful as my friends are, and they will come over here and they will feed him and they'll do anything I need. They'll drive him places. At the end of the day, at 3:00 in the morning when I'm spiraling, it's not, you can't. So other parents who get it are really, really important. For sure. And what you're doing, having these conversations, bringing people together, these opportunities for discussion are super important, because you just never know what's going to resonate with someone at that time or offer them the hope or the help that they might be not even knowing they need at that moment. So kudos to you guys for doing this.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. And have me back anytime you want. I'm
I
around.
was going to say, and thank you for coming in. This won't be the last time. This is just kind of us bending over the corner of the page of the book, and we'll come back to it later.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thanks to you both for having me.
wonderful
Thank you,
meeting you,
thank you.
Brenda. I can't wait till our next meet.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Absolutely.
guys. Okay. Bye.